In this paper, we are going to discuss East End Jam, an ongoing walking, foraging, picking and preserving project that celebrates the unexpected fruitfulness of the urban environment. It takes place in the East End of London in the UK. Had this been an in-person session, we would have offered all of you a tasting selection of the jams, jellies and chutneys that we have made as part of the project, working through the idea that they are a kind of map of the area that produced them, and that the walking, foraging, preserving and eating processes can be considered as a form of participatory cartography. Our remoteness makes that extra level of sensory engagement impossible, so we will endeavour to describe and to bring to life as many of the tastes, smells and textures as we can. This presentation is written by and delivered jointly by us, Claire and Amy. I'm Claire. I'm an artist and academic working in performing arts at the University of East London, and Amy is an anthropologist working on a master's thesis at University College London. We worked together on the project in 2018-2019 when Amy was a research intern, and we have continued to collaborate on thinking around maps, mapping and sensory engagement in relationship to the work together. East End Jam is an artwork and I'm an artist. It's a live work in a medium that's often described as social practice, a sphere in which art uses real-world systems, activities and actions to make things happen. The work is participatory, time-based and interactive. The lived experience of walking, foraging, picking, preserving and eating is the artwork. This aesthetic framework is the primary lens, but it also operates in other spheres, as an activist intervention claiming free food and the knowledge to use it, politically as a claiming of public and other spaces, and with reference to health and well-being in its connections with the natural environment and physical activity within it. In practice, these spheres all overlap and inform each other. The work has been ongoing since 2014, when it was inspired by an unexpectedly fruitful walk around Stratford in East London. The work has grown to engage with participants in a range of different ways, inviting people to walk, forage, pick and preserve fruit together, and then sharing the resulting foods in a free public feast or jamboree.
Today, we are going to focus on walks and workshops that took place over the last 3 years from a base on the Wilton Estate in Hackney, East London. In the first year, 2018, a foraging walk and jam making workshop was held on the estate. In the second, 2019, I was one of 2 interns working alongside Claire, using video and photographic ethnography with the open research area of inquiry, what does the artwork do? In the third, 2020, we had to attempt our planned in-person workshops into remote activities, sharing identification guides and location tips, and holding very small cooking sessions with 1 or 2 participants at a time, in line with social distancing guidance. Asking participants to draw maps of edible plants, fruits and berries in their local area, and to describe their maps to us. Themes that have emerged include sensory engagement with nature in an urban environment, nature connection and a sense of belonging to a place, shared activity, for community building, and the idea of the commons. We don't have time to deal with all of these here, so we are going to focus on sensory engagement and nature connection in relation to mapping. Firstly, the senses. Walking and foraging are ways of being in a place that change your perception. You move differently, more slowly perhaps, and less set on a straight line or path. You allow your attention to be drawn to zigzag back and forth. You look up to scan trees for fruit or for blossom that is a tell of fruit to come. You look down onto the ground, the carpet of plums or the purple stained burchett revealing hidden elderberries. Looking and moving is different, but the shift encompasses all your senses. The smell of the fig tree, the plop and splosh sound of an apple falling into water, the soft squelch and slip of plums underfoot before the hard pip engages with the sole of your shoe and the gravelly surface of the path. Walking with others, we have observed a lack of trust in some participants' own perceptions of the food around them. For example, cherries that really look just like cherries, yet people are reluctant to try them, exclaiming with surprise at the assertion that you can eat them. Preparing food together instigates a whole range of sensorial experiences too. Smelling the aroma of fruit, looking down at and feeling the fruits to check for bugs and the occasional off berry, and of course having a taste of any of the fruits that look appealing, stirring the jam as it cooks, and squeezing the fruit through sieves and jelly bags. The caution around foraging and plant identification outside for some continued into the cooking space, feeling nervous of the fruit that we'd picked, wanting to check and double check that it was safe to eat, nervous of cutting away any soft patches or removing insect or insect damage and eating the rest. Encouraging people to use and trust their senses in relation to this wild food became an important part of the workshops, confirming what researchers like Caroline Steele have noted about a disconnection from food that leaves us fearful without the reassurance of supermarket packaging and labelling.
Although discussion around plant blindness, a term coined in 1999 by Wondersee and Schussler, provides us with some useful frames for our thinking, we follow McDonough Mackenzie, Nebbing, Barak et al.'s rejection of the term on ableist grounds. To quote them, because it positions blindness as a deficit that must be cured and negates the possibility that blind people can lead lives that are full of rich sensory flora experiences, end quote. We prefer instead to refer to nature connection, drawing on Cleary, Fielding, Murray and Royko's 2018 summary of terms that feed this area. They highlight biophilia, therapeutic landscapes, place attachment, inclusion of nature in self, and emotional affinity with nature, all terms which centre the goals and positives rather than a deficit. Although we choose not to use that term, we have a shared interest in countering disconnection and alienation from nature, specifically edible plants and wild foods, and raising levels of awareness through the activities that East End Jam as an artwork instigates. These are nature experiences that often also involve performances of unusual behaviours. The reaching and leaning over to pick, climbing up trees or onto railings, leaning down and around, clambering in and out of bushes, all disrupt the normative expectations of activity in urban space and provide close-up, durational, sensorial engagements with flora. Equally, the artwork challenges binary thinking about urban space. Elizabeth Wilson, in her 1995 paper, The Rhetoric of Urban Space, points out that largely we consider the city and nature as opposites, shorthand for the rural and the urban. One excludes the other. Yet here we are in London, Zone 2, gathering kilos of blackberries, 4 different varieties of plums, and hedgerow fruits galore. Studies on nature connection using Mayer and France's connectedness to nature scale confirm this binary assumption too, with non-urban nature experiences being predominantly recalled by participants. Literature on nature connection focuses on wide-angle leisure activities like walking, hiking and sailing, with little attention to more specific, and I would say slower activities in studies that are focused usually on children, where participation in activities like summer camps and field trips is linked to greater levels of nature connection. Also helpful to consider has been research and discussion of therapeutic landscapes that has developed to account for interaction and for a relational approach, as Conradson asserts, quote, as something that emerges through a complex set of transactions between a person and their broader socio-environmental setting, end quote, going on to suggest a difference between therapeutic landscapes and therapeutic landscape experiences.
So what about mapping? Making use of Eade's 2015 book on cartography, Firth notes how, and I quote, some maps by their design preclude empowerment because of the erasures, silences and gaps inherent to that design, end quote. Contrary to traditional mapping, we aim to use cartography within our practice as a method of documenting the impacts of the workshop on the mental maps of the participants. Gold and White, in their examination of the topic, emphasise that spatial information is always produced at the individual level. This spatial information forms our mental maps, illuminating our perception of our place within the larger community. Giving the participants a chance to physicalise their mental maps allowed us as researchers to have a unique insight into the way the residents sees the world around them, but also how that perception had changed through nature interaction. We drew on the idea of participatory mapping or cartography as a performative process, allowing the cartographer to bring new worlds into being as a process of social change and of effective learning. This was abundantly clear in the maps drawn for us by participants. Many of them were functionally useless for navigation. However, they provided a representation of the practice of everyday life for the cartographer, explored by the researcher.
Had we been together in person, this is what the table in front of you would have looked like by now. Each of you would have undertaken a gustatory journey as we talked that described this part of the city through its flavours: elderflower jelly, cherry jam, mahonia jelly, plum chutney, apple and blackberry cheese, and finally a jar of what we call East End jam, a preserve containing a little bit of everything we've picked, the reference point or map jam. As we tasted it, we would have told you that the loquats came from a huge tree overhanging on Navarino Road in Shamima's front garden. Actually, since we picked these, it's sadly been cut down as its roots were starting to unsettle the foundations of the house. There are elderberries from Navarino Road as well. The mulberries are from street trees on Eleanor Road, a line of 6, though only 2 of them fruit. There are 3 varieties of apples. 2 come from Wilton Estate's garden and 1 from a tree that overhangs on Wilton Way. Everyone, kids and adults, loves using the picking sticks to gather the apples. It's very satisfying. The plums are from the park, from the north edge of London Fields. There are 3 small trees there that in a good year carpet the ground with their tiny yellow fruit. The mahonia come from the Blackstone estate, just on the edge of the park. Raspberries are from one of the paths that leads into the estate, just on the edge. And we have also added rhubarb grown in the community garden. Traditional map making takes this tasty, smelly, textured world and represents formal, important elements of it 2-dimensionally. Maps draw boundaries, aid navigation, establish distances, and serve a multitude of other purposes. Asserting that a jar of jam is a map may seem quite a leap, but we contend that, as we have just described, the eating of a jar of jam made from fruit that you have walked your neighbourhood looking for, picked in acts that disrupt the norm, and worked together to prepare and cook, shapes and remakes your mental map of that place, and that its tastes and memories conjure up that place. If the jam is a map, it follows that the making of it is cartography, a multi-sensory participatory cartography. The performative potentials of this process are our next focus in the work. As the project runs through further seasonal iterations, we will explore further the themes that we've presented here, looking at how nature connection, sensory engagement, relational landscape experiences, and map drawing act on a personal level in relation to the community, and further on in interaction with more formal controls, uses, and planning of space.